We're live.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Matt.
Hello.
So this is Q&A week 7, and we don't have many questions this week, but we have one kind of a meta question, and then we want to address this long discussion thread in the GitHub repository about MVVM and RX. So we'll say something about that. So shall we start with a simple meta question? I think that's a good idea. So let me see if I can look this up. This is from Thomas, and Thomas asks what our workflow basically is to generate the books. And so there are two things we can say about that. So far, what we have always done is we have written our books using plain Markdown. Of course, we have GitHub repository somewhere to do branching and reviews and all this kind of stuff. And then we transform the Markdown sometimes, a couple of times, pre-formatting it, pulling in code, testing the code that is there. It really depends on the book with custom scripts. And then we go through Pandoc to generate LaTeX, and then we use LaTeX for the PDF version, or we use Pandoc directly to generate EPUB, and then use a EPUB to Mobi converter for the Mobi version. So this is the general outline, the general workflow we've always used. And we would like to get rid of it, actually, because it's a dependency mess. And it's like mostly we have at the end of a book, like shortly before the release, one of our machines is able to generate the book correctly. And the others, something is off. Maybe some LaTeX version is not exactly the right one, or Pandoc doesn't compile anymore because I have the wrong Haskell version installed, or whatever it is. So we would like to get rid of all of that, and we are trying to replace it with something custom.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll make that for this book, if we'll finish it, because we want to focus on the book first, but hopefully we'll be able to get it ready.
Yeah, and the idea is to just write a Mac app, one binary, just using Mac's native text abilities to do all that. So this will be much faster and much easier to maintain, much more control. So that's the idea for the future. So let's move on to this nice discussion that we had here. So I will try to summarize the general sentiment. So we have this MVVM chapter in the book. Parts of it are released, not everything. And so we have an MVVM implementation, and we use RX Swift for binding the view model to the views, but we also use RX Swift within the view models to set up data transformation pipelines to do all the heavy lifting, basically, and to prepare the data for display. And multiple people said, well, using RX, using the big dependency like RX can make it really hard to understand MVVM as a pattern if you're not familiar with RX or reactive programming. And others said, well, having a big dependency like RX is in general a problem because we cannot use this in our company and these kind of things. So do you want to go first?
Yeah, I completely sympathize with that. I think we can acknowledge that, yes, RX is a big dependency, RX Swift. Any reactive programming library really is a big dependency, and it's also something you need to learn, and that's frustrating. I think if you don't know reactive programming, it's hard, typically, and it's a new thing to learn, and that's not cool. And I think another thing is that we can acknowledge that it's not realistic for everybody to use these libraries at their day job. If your company doesn't allow external libraries, that's not so. Then it's not easy to use something like RX Swift. And depending on your coworkers and everything. And there were even some people who said, like, well, you could still call it MVVM even if you don't have something like reactive programming or bindings, which, it depends on who you look at for the authority on MVVM. I can see why they say that, and I don't think it's wrong per se. I also don't agree, and I think I think we can do something with the feedback. But I do think in the end, what we want to show is MVVM with RX Swift, because it does bring, even with the learning hurdle that it sort of gives us, I do think it's more realistic to show MVVM like that and to show the benefits of it. I don't know, Matt, do you have anything to say about this?
Yeah, it's a complicated issue because there's not a single way of doing this. And you can think about the view model in particular in lots of different ways. It is certainly possible to make the view model basically just the data functions of a view controller. And you just move those data functions into another spot. You haven't changed them. They're still exactly as they were. You're observing the model, you're preparing the data for the view, and then not even use reactive programming, just expose it as KVO observables, standard COCO key value observing, and then in your view controller, observe that and apply it to the view. Technically, you could argue that this qualifies as MVVM, but it's hard to argue that it's in any way canonical. I mean, it's not really doing anything interesting. It's basically just MVC with things moved around. And if all you're doing is moving things around, then you're not really changing your abstractions or improving things. You've just moved things around. And in this case, you've added this observable layer, which is a lot of busy work. To what end? I mean, you can cut your view controller in half, or actually more often like 1/3 and 2/3, but you haven't changed the code size. You're not really reducing the number of dependencies. You're not really changing your representation of the data graph. Why have you done this? Now, for some people, they feel they have to do it because they want that interface for testing. Well, okay. And that's kind of where we feel maybe we haven't surfaced the idea that we've done examples of all of these variations in different parts of the book. But if you read through the MVVM chapter, it gives what we think is the best approach for MVVM, the sort of ideal case if you could make it happen. And we do want to maybe revisit the start of the MVVM chapter so we can say, and look, there are these alternatives. And if you look in this part of the book or at that code example over there, you'll see how that alternative works. And you'll see how it's maybe similar to this, which is why we didn't go for it. So yes, you can make versions of MVVM that are very different to what we did. And yes, you can... Yes, we did some of these things, and maybe people want to try them. And yes, we think trying things out and experimenting with them is a good idea. At the same time, though, we want to be a bit opinionated in the book, and sometimes that means doing things that are hard for people. That's okay. You know, just because we've called this MVVM doesn't mean you have to buy into all of it at the same time. You know, MVVM isn't the one true way that everyone has to adopt now just because.
No, absolutely not. And I do think I like that idea of trying things out. When I try to learn something, the best way for me is to really experiment with it. And I think if you want to learn MVVM, it's very useful to sort of first do it in the most hardcore way. And then you can see what you can take from that. And yeah, things like reactive programming, if you're intimidated by that, that's fine because it's complicated and it's normal. And, you know, I also, at the beginning, I struggled a lot with trying to understand all these signal transformations and everything. And it's very normal that it's complicated.
Yeah, so I personally, for example, I'm not very interested in getting into discussions about exactly if something is MVP or not, or is MVVM or not, because the problem is just that there is no canonical definition for these things on iOS. It's just, you can always say, well, here it's done like that, and here it's done like that, and most people do this. But if you look a bit past these acronyms, then you can just say, well, there are different ways of doing things, and then you can put a name on them if that helps in communication, but sometimes it doesn't. And yeah, so we will definitely, it's good to get all this feedback. It's a little bit painful because we are attached to our decisions, but it's also really good, and I think we will make some good revisions because of that. So that's thanks. That's really helpful to make the chapter better.
Yeah.
And yeah, but the bottom line probably is we will definitely show MVVM with RX, but we will augment things here and there, and to outline more the spectrum of options you have, depending on what you prefer or what you are able to do within a company or something like that. So I think that's enough about this topic. That's all we have for today. So if you have more questions for us next week, send them our way per email or GitHub issues or Twitter, something like that. And yeah, that's it for today, right?
Yeah.
See you next week. Bye, Matt.
Bye, Matt.
Bye. See you later.